So I subtly announced I was going to make a bunch of plaids for November, but here's what happened. For the first time, I'm taking a sewing class at my local community college where they had something called a sustainability challenge. There were 4 categories and I wanted to enter them all, but I decided I was going to do plastic fantastic first. And I knew I wanted to do plastic bags because I hate them. My first thought was to sort of shred them into a lot of skinny pieces just to play with the material and see what I could make, if I could braid it, if I could weave it. And I ended up knitting it by gluing a bunch of pieces end on end. But I'm not the best knitter, and plastic against the skin isn't very nice. So my next thought was to sort of just like gather it against a piece of fabric, but sewing directly onto fabric made me kind of nervous, even though it created this really cool, almost tool-like texture. And so I thought, well, what if I gathered it instead onto pieces of ribbon, and then I could apply the ribbon onto the fabric as needed, and I could shift it around. And from there I realized, oh, I could do big pieces, not just skinny little pieces of plastic. And from there, I just thought, well, what if I treated the plastic like tulle? And so, with the thought of tulle came the idea of like classic Dior or Galliano era Dior. And I love golden era Hollywood, so I wanted it to be really rich, like a sugar daddy robe. So I found this pattern and I thought, oh, that's a good base to build off of, because I don't know if you saw, but it had this like lace yoke that I then thought, oh, I can attach sleeves from that. And it had an underdress. And I found this remnant of gold silk. It's almost pajama fabric because the inside is very kind of soft and cottony, while the outside has a beautiful sheen. And I thought, okay, I'll make the underdress out of that. Here I am sewing the princess seams on the bodice, and then I cut a second bodice out of the same fabric for a lining, which I'm then going to apply boning to. As you can see, it came really curled up, thanks to internet, and I left it overnight under some water jugs just to straighten it out. If you've never done a dress with boning before, you take out the plastic first and then you sew down the casing. And when you reinsert it, you want to be sure to trim it away and round the edges just so that it doesn't poke through. And you can see it creates a really nice shape for the dress. It'll kind of hold its own under all that floofy plastic. Speaking of floofy plastic, here is where I start to deconstruct the bags, which I'm then going to use for the embellishment. I cut off the bottoms and then cut off the tops. I'll reuse those straps later for like the flower pieces. And then just kind of vaguely eyeball it. I'm using strips of about 3 or 4 inches wide for the gathered pieces, which is like maybe 5 or 6 pieces per bag. And I didn't have a gathering foot, so I was just using the ribbon underneath the sewing machine and forcing it through. Incidentally, I did this on both an industrial machine and on my home sewing machine. As you can see, it worked equally well on both. If for some reason you ever want to do that, though let's be honest, why would you? And as you can see, I was doing this like just 6 million times, creating random color patterns. I was doing that based off of this fabric. This is the sequiny fabric that I really wanted to use for the yoke. It made an absolute mess, but I loved the result. I think it is so pretty. And then it was time to move on to the tulle, which my dog was not a huge fan of. Basically, I got like 6 yards, I think, of the different tulle colors to match the bag colors. So this would be your Joann's or H-E-B white, followed by your Kroger gold and your Dollar Tree silver. Then I put a gathering stitch along the folded top of them. I probably should have separated them into 2 different pieces, but I'm lazy. And again, it was huge. It was like 6 yards. So I just put a gathering stitch in there in all of them, pulled them all together, and now I'm going to layer them one on top of the other to the lowest part of the mini dress. So I have not yet attached the waistband because this is actually going to be tucked into the waistband. And honestly, this was the hardest part of the entire process. I don't love working with tulle. I don't love working with really big floofy fabrics, and gathered fabrics in general can be hard to work with just to make sure that they look kind of evenly distributed and really nice. So I sewed them one layer at a time, and even then they are blocking my camera view and running into my tripod and just creating a mess. Then back to the plastics. Here I am making some flowers just by curling those ribbons in a circle and using hot glue. I hate hot glue as much as I hate tulle, but there I was using both. And those are the straps of the bags that I'm also creating some big statement flowers. Here is where I am in the process, and honestly, this is where tragedy strikes. So the problem with this design, as I see it, is that it looks like a really fancy dress with plastic flowers stuck onto it, and that defeats the purpose. The purpose is more about having the plastic look like the really high-end fabric, create the really great illusion. So here I am trying some different designs, some honestly better than others. I get it. But that is what I love about sewing, that you just sometimes have to throw things against a wall and see what works. And you never really know what's going to work until you start playing with and manipulating the material. So I settled on just using the plain bodice. That's actually what I was going to have the lining for. So I made a muslin lining. And here is yet another place where tulle thwarted me, because when attaching the waistband, it created so much volume that it didn't actually cover all the way. I had to do some extensions and some funny interior work that thankfully no one sees, including an extremely bad zipper, probably the worst of my life, but don't worry about it. Anyway, this is the base I end up working with, and now it's time to apply all of these plastic ribbons I've made. And oh, hey, look at the cover of Vogue. It just looks like a high-end version of my plastic dress. No biggie. If this were a high-end dress, I would undoubtedly want to hand sew these ribbons with the gathered whatever fabric it is onto the bodice or onto the overskirt. But this is not a high-end version. That is plastic, and that is fabric glue that I am then clamping into place and letting dry on the bodice. That works in the areas where there's actually thicker fabric to attach to, but you're about to see I've trimmed away the tulle and I'm trying to use fabric glue, and it's just not going to work there. It just goes straight through the tulle. So I have to do the type of glue that I like the least. There it is. Hello, my hot glue gun. Yeah. And it does work. It does work to apply these ribbons. What you're not seeing is me screaming in pain and jumping up and down from the number of times I burned myself. I probably didn't have fingerprints at the end of this because I did multiple rows. There's like at least 2 rows along the front of every layer, and then about 3 to 4 in the back. And here I am even trying to shape it into like that's a heart design. On the golds, there's going to be 2 little loop-de-loops, and the look is pretty cool, but was it worth it? My fingers would have to say no. I mean, oh well, at least the skin will grow back until, oh no, never mind, I have more gluing to do. In this case, it is gluing those plastic flowers to the bodice. In hindsight, I think this might be the only thing I would change. I would leave a little bit more of that fabric showing just because it was really nice, but I had made the flowers and it wouldn't be very sustainable to throw them away. Plus, when you go floofy, you gotta go full floof, right? And floof is definitely how I would describe this final look, being modeled by my favorite model / best friend, Blair. I end up doing 2 more looks for the sustainability challenge, so stay tuned for those videos.